Hello students, and this is Mr. Barley coming to you from just outside of my house. If the garage door were to shut, it would land on my legs right now. I wanted to film this lesson outdoors because why not? We have nothing else going on, so when you're bored, you do dumb things like film a lesson outside. So, oh, and look what I got on, everyone. I wore my wooden tie today. Many of you always ask me to wear this, and I always say no because it's very uncomfortable. So, on that token, I'm going to take it off because it is very uncomfortable. But the things I do for you, I sacrifice so much. Not really. Oh, and I made sure I have my badge, just in case you forget that I actually am your teacher, and I do actually work at this place. So there's my badge. It's official. I'm not a predator coming to, kidnap you or something. So let me take this thing off because it's not gonna work for me. But wooden tie, I'm the only one that has one. Booyah. But I'll keep my badge on just in case through the lesson you get so bored you fall asleep and you wake back up and you wonder, whoa, what's going on? Who is that guy? And you'll know it's me. And I'm officially a teacher. So doesn't mean you're good if you have one of these, but it's official. So as you can see by the screen, we're going to be talking about our final great revolution in Europe. We did the Industrial Revolution, and that was a technological revolution that we all know made a huge impact on the world. The Second Revolution, the last thing we talked about was the French Revolution. Now we're going to move on to the Russian Revolution. Now this is very similar to the French Revolution in very, very many ways. There's so many parallels. It's very bizarre. And I'm going to point those out as we go along. But this was a major impact on the world, okay? Huge impact. The Russian Revolution basically set up the political powers and balance that our world has today. And by the time I'm done, hopefully you get that. So, the Russian Revolution, everybody. First things first. We got to talk about the people, all right? So Russia, at this time in history, now this is the early 1900s, okay? So the Russian Revolution really starts at the turn of the century, okay? And it lasts all the way up until about 1919, 1920. So it's kind of like a long, slow revolution. Similar story to the French Revolution, right? That happened over the course of a decade. So let's talk about the people then. In Russia at this time, people are destitute, okay? Russia was the last European country to industrialize. They didn't industrialize until the late 1800s. We're talking 1880, 1890 before they had a factory. But just like the Industrial Revolution did to cities all over the world and people all over the world, it set up a situation where you have peasants who are cramming into cities, excuse me, and they're living in terrible, destitute conditions, all right? Good old factories, right? Classic stuff here, some Oliver Twist going on. But the Russian peasantry was in a particularly bad position compared to the rest of Europe. What the Russians didn't do was give us a rip about the people. Okay, the Russian government was very much disconnected from the needs of average individuals in their nation. The Russians were the very last people in Europe to give up feudalism, folks. Yes, feudalism. The old nobility has privilege, peasants have nothing and exist on earth to serve just the wealthy. It was in Russia for much, much longer than anywhere else in Europe. And one of the big reasons that the rest of Europe went away from all that, we talked about in the French Revolution because of Enlightenment thinking about democracy and freedom and human rights. That spread throughout Europe, and then it hit Russia and died. It never penetrated into Russia. That way of thinking never made it that far. So, here are Russian peasants, rocking some sweet hats, as you can see, the classic Russian hat. And these are basically very, very downtrodden, destitute people. Here's some basket weavers. There's some person looking out the window. Cool. Here's a market. Okay, classic Russian market. Now, villages all over Russia are packed full of these people who live day to day, just poor, lowly people. Okay, just surviving. And this kind of sets up a situation where you have angry people who see a lot of privilege in other places. This guy right here is Tsar Nicholas II, and that's his wife, Tsarina Alexandria. Okay, now the word Tsar, by the way, derives from the word Caesar. Okay, Tsar Nicholas II was your classic Russian noble. And by the way, she was a German. Okay, so a German princess married a Russian. This is how feudalism worked in the day. Oftentimes, marriages of the nobles were marriages to bring countries together and basically to cement like international relationships, and this was no different, although they did love each other. That was one thing that was known. A lot of these marriages were loveless marriages where your wife hated you. I kind of get that, but not really. She's filming right now and she just gave a sad look, so I know you, that you don't hate me. Anyway, so they did have a very, very happy marriage between the two of them. Now, Tsar Nicholas lived a life of luxury, okay? He had absolute 100% monarchy power, okay? There is no other voice within his government that he can't squash. So he has absolute power. And here's some classic Russian family nobility. There's Tsar Nicholas right there. He's got a great beard, by the way. I mean, that beard is furious. I wish I could do something like that. So compare that to this, though. You know, this is oftentimes the impetus, the creation of revolution. It's having extreme power and wealth put into the hands of very few who don't really give a squat about the many. There's our Nicholas right there. Him and his buddies. Tsar Nicholas was an infamous drinker. He loved to drink vodka, like by the bucket load. Okay, which is kind of a Russian cliche, so that Russians drink a lot of vodka. Sometimes cliches are true. This is the coronation of Tsar Nicholas II. Coronation is when you get crowned king, and it's like, woohoo! Now, Tsar Nicholas was kind of like an unexpected emperor. It's supposed to be his older brother, but his older brother abdicated, meaning he gave up. He said, I don't want to be, you have it. And Tsar Nicholas was kind of thrust into a situation that he wasn't prepared for because he hadn't spent his youth preparing to be the Tsar. His brother did. And so he is basically completely and totally unprepared for this role. He loved to hunt. That's one thing you got to respect, because I love to hunt too. But the hunting trips that the Tsars would go on were like ridiculous. I mean, he literally would hunt for weeks at a time, and they didn't really have like tags to fill, so you could just go shoot and kill anything you wanted in any quantity you wanted. And we have like these records of some of their hunts where they literally killed like 500 deer. 1,000 quail, 2,000 pheasants. I mean, insane amounts of game is killed. But I guess if you are the Tsar and you have absolute power, yay, good on you. You get to kill lots of stuff. There she is, Tsarina Alexandra. Okay. This is the beginning of the revolution here, okay? This is depicting a riot in the streets of Moscow. Actually, no, this is not Moscow. Moscow is the current capital of Russia. Back in the day, it was St. Petersburg, which they called at that time Petrograd. So this is a riot in the streets of what today is called St. Petersburg, Russia. The peasants were upset and annoyed because they were starving. Sound familiar to the French Revolution, people? When you have starving people, you have trouble, okay? You had a situation where workers were basically completely and totally cut out of government, any decision making, and they weren't going to take it anymore, I suppose. So, Tsar Nicholas II was forced to allow an assembly of average people to come in and help make decisions for him. Now, here's the thing. He never really gave up his power as a monarch, okay? He opened up these assemblies only to men, and they were intended to be workers and soldiers, okay? Just average people. And they called them Dumas, okay? And the people knew that the Dumas were a joke. This is a Duma right here, okay? This is what they do. They would come and they would meet. Tsar Nicholas, of course, would lead the Duma. And these people made suggestions for change. Ways to make Russia a better place and more equitable for workers and average people. Tsar Nicholas started to dissolve Dumas that he didn't like. Okay, So he pulled together a group of people and say, hey, I hear you. Don't riot in the streets anymore, please. And we're going to now allow you to have some decision making. Then the Duma would come up with a bunch of suggestions that Tsar Nicholas didn't like. Everything from paying workers more to allowing them to have more rights and more of this, and that which would take power away from Tsar Nicholas. And what he would do with his ultimate powers, he would just dissolve the Duma. He's like, nah, go home. We're done. We're done here. And he does this several times. Every single time a Duma, and this happens over the course of years, it's like first Duma, second Duma, third Duma. Whenever they meet, if he doesn't like what he hears in the Duma, it's done. It's like our president being able to say, hey, Senate, Congress, I don't like that law. Go home and don't come back because you're done. So the people become more and more restless because of this. Had Tsar Nicholas been a little bit more, I guess, open to the idea of average people making a difference or having a say in these Dumas, the revolution may have been it. That would have been it, okay? But that's not how history unfolded here, folks. Okay, let's fast forward in time here. Throughout the 1910s, like 1900s, 06, 07, 08, and then for a period of time, it's kind of like a stasis mode. Russia is still very, very much in, I guess, a kind of a crisis mode. People are restless. There's frequent riots. Tsar Nicholas actually employs his military on a number of occasions to put down different revolts all over Russia. So it's like a powder keg. People are upset. In steps World War I, which is going to be our topic next week. World War I is a very, very complex web of allies and powers that basically exploded into this war that no one had seen before. Okay, the worst war you could ever imagine. Russia was one of the first nations to declare war in World War I, and of course they declared war on what would be Germany today. Then it was called the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but same people, same language, and all that. Which is, by the way, is where his wife was from. Kind of awkward when you declare war on your wife's country. Wow. Anyway, this is our Nicholas on the front lines of the war. For the first part of World War I, okay, so 1915, 16, 17, he just left it completely up to his generals to lead the military. And at one point, Tsar Nicholas decides, hey, I'm going to take control here. I'm going to show the people that I'm for them. And he takes control of the army, and it's a joke. It's like one of those kind of guys who comes in and you're wondering, well, why are you even here, dude? Like, you have no say. Like, he didn't have a clue. He played soldier. He wasn't a soldier. He didn't have an idea at all how to fight a war. But I guess that's kind of beside the point, because the bigger picture is this. Russia's military was trash. And they were getting beat badly over and over again. So here's the situation. You have an upset, downtrodden, starving peasantry. And you have a war that's going terribly bad. And you're seeing hundreds of thousands of your countrymen being slaughtered. And Russians are wondering why. Because World War I, quite frankly, is one of the most senseless wars in all of history. When you look back at why we were at war, and of course we were involved too as America, it's almost like there's no sense to it at all. And I will make some sense of it next week, okay? Now, so here's our Nicholas, plain soldier on the front line. Now, enter the great villain of history, Rasputin, okay? Alexei Rasputin. Rasputin was a peasant himself, okay? So he is a very, very bizarre and interesting person in history. Rasputin, he grew up in Siberia in a tiny little village. And for, I guess, maybe a way to get out of that terrible situation, he becomes a spiritual guru, okay? And he starts what essentially is what we would call today a cult. People following him blindly. So he has basically followers, okay? And he claims to be able to cure people's illnesses, okay? So he's one of those people that's you're healed kind of a guy, he can put hands on you and heal you. And what if that works with COVID? Be gone, virus. Or you can just drink bleach. No, don't do that. Don't drink bleach. The first time in history, I think the Tide Pod Challenge is no, don't go there. Okay, moving on. Rasputin, he goes to Petrograd. Okay, so he goes to the big city, and it becomes a known thing in Russian society, high society, that there's this guy who can cure people by touching them. And Tsarina Alexandra has a son. It's her only son. Okay, it's her and Nicholas's son, and this kid is a hemophiliac. Okay, if you have hemophilia, basically, if you get like even a bruise or a little cut, you can die. Okay, you can bleed out internally from a bruise. It's a disease that basically your blood doesn't clot and you just bleed and bleed and bleed and eventually just bleed out. Okay, so it's a very serious illness. Well, Tsarina Alexandra decides Rasputin is her man that's going to take care of her son. And he comes into their home, and he doesn't physically live with them, but he's with them all the time. And he becomes like her spiritual leader as well. Tsarina Alexandra was very... I'm trying to talk to Amazon, I guess. She was very religious herself, and she actually bought totally into Rasputin. Okay, he becomes a family spiritual advisor, and at the same time, though, his reputation is absolutely mud amongst most people. They see him as being a puppet master, controlling the royal family, a spiritual guru who can heal people by touching them, and people are like, really? This is the guy? That guy? And he was especially unpopular with the nobles, because the nobles, the wealthy Russians, saw him as like just poisoning the mind of the Tsar and his wife by controlling them. He also got a reputation for being very promiscuous with all the Russian oligarchs, the wealthy people. So his reputation was kind of as a scoundrel, like a bad guy. And I don't know, he's just such a really bizarre, interesting person in history. It's very rare that you can talk about a revolution happening in a nation that also involves a spiritual guru as a central character. So pretty bizarre. This is a Russian cartoon. This is from the time, so it's a primary source, everybody. And it shows Rasputin here with Tsar Nicholas and Tsarina Alexandra on his lap, basically, being their little babies. You know what I mean? You can see the perspective of the cartoon here. And this was not too terribly untrue, to be quite honest with you, because he did have especially Tsarina wrapped around his little finger. He could do no wrong. Now, Rasputin sows a lot of discord. Okay, that's really his role in the revolution, and he erodes trust that people, nobles and average people alike, have in their czar. And if the people don't like you, they're going to be more inclined to revolt, rise up, and create massive revolution. There's tons of these cartoons. All over Russia, these things were printed and distributed. They'd actually do things like print leaflets of these, and then they would just like go out into the streets and just like throw them around. And then people would just walk over, hey, look at that, there's our Nicholas and Tsarina Alexandra with their boy, Rasputin. Oh, I don't want to move on until I tell you what happened to him, because he has one of the most interesting deaths ever. So, like I said, the nobles didn't like him. And several times there were plots hatched by wealthy Russians to bump him off, to get rid of him. And they eventually did. But this is kind of like maybe exaggerated somewhat in history, but it's still a story worth telling. Rasputin apparently was poisoned, okay? So they poisoned him. They poisoned wine, put cyanide in it. Didn't kill him. He apparently drank the whole bottle of wine, which is a lot of wine anyways, and it was filled with poison, and he didn't die. And out of frustration, the nobles sent a guy up to shoot him, and he did. He shot him in the chest. So Rasputin was poisoned and shot, and then they took his body and dumped it in a river, threw it off a bridge into a river, And they found his body several days later, but the weird thing is he had water inside of his lungs when they did an autopsy on him. That means that he was still breathing when they threw him in that water. So Rasputin gets this reputation in history as being like this unkillable man, poisoned, shot, and drowned, all just to die, all those things. It's blown up, but it's still an interesting story. So Rasputin is a part of this revolution in the sense that he creates mistrust. Okay. Now, let's talk about what we call the October Revolution. Okay. This is the breaking point of Tsar Nicholas's reign as emperor. People rose up right in the streets. There was a lot of bloodshed and death between loyalists to Tsar Nicholas and people and revolutionaries, and eventually Tsar Nicholas is forced to abdicate. So he basically is forced to no longer be king, and voila, revolution. The last of the Tsars, Tsar Nicholas II, is kicked out of office. This is Tsar Nicholas's head in statue form, which had been toppled. We see this a lot in revolutions, because a lot of times when you have people with absolute power, they love to make statues of themselves and put them up all over the place. Change happens, and people out of anger will rip these statues down. The one that really sticks with me that I remember the most from my lifetime, and I'm just making a parallel between these two events, is when Saddam Hussein was ousted from power in Iraq. There's this famous news footage of the people ripping down a statue and of good old Saddam Hussein. And what I think is funny is it's in Arabic culture, your feet are considered very dirty. And to show someone the bottom of your foot is considered insulting. And even more insulting is to hit someone with a shoe, because a shoe is a part of your, the feet, and it's dirty. And so all the Iraqis are out there with their shoes, whacking the statue, hitting the statue with their shoe, which is like insulting. So I don't know what we do. What we do is we put flaming bags of dog poop on people's porches. That's how we express that anger. Okay, here's really where the rubber meets the road. Why the Russian Revolution is so very, very important. Okay, Tsar Nicholas is ousted from power, and there was an interim government which was basically completely and totally toothless and had no real power. People knew they didn't have real power. In steps a guy named Vladimir Lenin, and we just call him Lenin, not John Lennon. It's Lenin, not Lenon, different guy. But Vladimir Lenin, he basically steps in this power void, and he has to by force. He does by force, with an army of loyalists at his back called the Red Army. He takes power. What's important about Lenin taking power is his political philosophy, and this is really how the Russian Revolution has shaped our world today. So, Vladimir Lenin believed in a political theory, a philosophy called communism, and communism is essentially the idea that governments should only be working for people only. And there should be a classless society. By classless society, it doesn't mean classless like a redneck going to a fancy dinner party with a sleeveless cut-off shirt. That's a different kind of classless. The kind of classless we're talking about here is there's no actual wealthy class, like upper class, middle class, lower class. Everyone's the same. It's like everyone has the same equal amounts of wealth, and everyone works communally for the greater good. That's communism. And it sounds pretty good on its face if you think about, oh yeah, everyone's equal. That's great. I mean, who doesn't love equality? Like we talk about equal rights and stuff like that all the time. Sure. But in practice, that's not how communism works. Wealthy still get wealthy. Power is still coalesced in the hands of few. But communism as a political philosophy has had a massive impact on the world that we live in right now. Right now, communism has a huge impact. This is the guy who came up with this idea. His name is Karl Marx. And Karl Marx wrote a book called The Communist Manifesto, which he laid out his principles of how a government should function. He wasn't a Russian, by the way. Karl Marx was Polish. But his ideas became very popular in Russia. And the ideas became popular in Russia for obvious reasons. You have a peasantry who sees no success, they are suffering, and they see the wealthy living opulent lifestyles, and so those people are gonna say, yeah, heck yeah, this is the way to be, communism. Woohoo! Yes! Now, Karl Marx may have been the philosophical starter of the Russian Revolution, in the sense of, not the starter, I shouldn't say that, the finisher, I suppose. The guy, the power void in the end becomes communism, and communism becomes the political philosophy of Russia, and Russia rebrands itself the Soviet Union. But the bottom line is, he was not a revolutionary. Karl Marx's ideas may have been a huge part of many revolutions throughout the world, honestly. Now, we're going to talk about some of those other revolutions. But he himself was not a revolutionary. He himself did not advocate for violence and whatnot. He has a little bit of a bad reputation throughout history, especially here in America, because of the political balance in the world that happened after World War II. And it really was a counterbalance between the West, which we are kind of still, I hope, the leaders of the West, and the Western ideals of the Enlightenment ideas, which came from the French Revolution and the American Revolution, the ideas of equal rights between all people, the ideas of freedom of speech, freedom of the press, trial by jury. Those ideas never really penetrated into Russia, but this idea did. And the Russians are basically the power balance to America. And I would nowadays lump China in as well. Russia and China are really the powers of the East. And one commonality they both have is technically Russia is not a communist country anymore. But China claims to be a communist country, but they're more capitalist than communist. We're capitalists. Like, you try to make money, and if you're talented and you have skills and you're able to make as much money as you can. Okay, that's capitalism at its core. And guess what? That's pretty much what China has become. So China calls themselves communists. The rulers of China are called the Communist Party, but in reality, you have to question how communist they really are. Are they really living in a classless society? Are they really thinking of just equality among everybody? No, not at all. So, okay, Karl Marx. Moving on. There's Vladimir Lenin. Okay, Vladimir Lenin. He steps in with communism as his driving philosophy and an army of people at his back called the Red Army. He takes power in Russia, and he actually he was what we call his party. Okay, don't get too confused here, but he didn't call himself the Communist Party. They called it the Bolshevik Party, and so he's the leader of what's called the Bolsheviks, which Bolsheviks believe in communism. Okay, I hope you're following me on that. And so he actually the Bolsheviks actually killed Tsar Nicholas's family, which to me, one of the great parallels between the French Revolution and the Russian Revolution is that people get so angry and kind of go overboard to a certain extent, and they end up killing their leaders. Okay, of course, it was with a guillotine that Louis XVI lost his head, and Marie Antoinette. The Bolsheviks. This is the 20th century now. Okay, so times have changed, and they shoot them. They capped them all. Blah, blah, blah. They killed the whole family. Nicholas, his wife, his kids. Okay, and also there's this famous, it's kind of an urban legend because really no evidence has ever come out to support this, but they say that one of Tsar Nicholas's family members survived. It was his daughter called Anastasia, and the idea is, oh, she's alive, she lived. Probably not. And there has been no very credible. There's a few candidates, like people in Europe are like, I'm Anastasia. Like women would just claim to be her at that time, say, hey, yeah, it's me. But they're just trying to get famous, and pretty much every single one of them, no, not pretty much, every single one of them have been proven to be false. So, but anyway, I guess I'm getting off on a tangent here. The Bolsheviks are in control. The Bolsheviks are communists. Vladimir Lenin is the founder of the Bolshevik Party and the first leader of the new Soviet Union. A new country is born here. There's Lenin again. Looking very serious. Looking very bald. Yep. Very, very Dillardish. This is one of the more bizarre things. Russians are weird. Vladimir Lenin is in a glass coffin in a tomb in what they call the Red Square in Moscow, which is the capital of modern-day Russia. And that's his actual body, folks. They embalmed him, and they put him here in this glass coffin after he died. He actually got shot and died. He was assassinated. But what's crazy about him is they leave him there, and they have to re-embalm him like every year. Like, they have to pump him full of formaldehyde, and then they remove it all, and then they do it again, and they've been doing that ever since he died. So it's been like 100 years of just being re-embalmed over and over and over again. Russians are weird. I mean, I'm just saying this from my perspective as an American. We would probably be appalled if we like embalmed Ronald Reagan and kept on like putting new embalming fluid in him. They spent like hundreds of thousands of dollars to do this, to maintain Lenin's body. But they're very proud of their history. They're proud of the founder of communism there. There he is, close up. Creepy. I mean, who would want to go look at that? I don't know. You know what they should do? They should just make a wax figurine and call it good. You know, like one of those wax things. Because those look pretty real, right? Okay. I really need to connect why the Russian Revolution is a big deal, because we're not Russians. We don't live in Russia. Why is communism important to an American? Well, communism has been the inspiration for many 20th century revolutions. Okay, these revolutions have had direct impacts on America and our history and our people. Folks, we had a policy to contain communism in our country. Okay, our president after World War II, Dwight D. Eisenhower, a great military hero, one of the best presidents in U.S. history, bar none, had this philosophy that he must stop communism, that it's America's role to stop communism from spreading throughout the world. And that philosophy has led America to a number of wars, okay? The first of which being the war between North Korea and South Korea. North Korea today is a communist country. It's a closed-off, very controlled system, of course, run by Kim Jong-un. And Kim Jong-un is very sick right now, apparently. On the internet, everyone's saying he's dead. From what I've heard, he's not, but who knows? Because they control the media. There's no free press there. So whatever you hear is what they want you to hear. So we went to war, though. Okay, technically the United Nations went to war, but we were the primary fighters in what's called the Korean War. Happened in 1953. So why did we go to war? To stop communism. Okay, so if you want to connect these dots throughout history, why is communism so important? It's because communism has been the great menace in the ideas in the minds of American leaders, and in many ways, communism created as much of a problem for America as anything has. Okay, in steps Vietnam. Okay, that was same idea. The Eisenhower Doctrine. We wanted to stop the Vietnamese from becoming communists. And of course, so we did the same thing there, just like we did in North Korea. We had a war. One of the biggest differences between the Korean War and the Vietnam War is we lost the Vietnam War and we were forced out, and Vietnam became communist despite our best efforts and the loss of lives of tens of thousands of Americans. Sometimes wars just don't make sense. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. You know, history always kind of washes out which ones made sense in the end after we do an examination looking back on it. Okay, so this picture up here is what we call the Berlin Wall. It's the Berlin Wall. Now, the Berlin Wall is largely gone, okay? But communism set up the political balance of power between the East and the West for decades and decades. And it's really the world I grew up in. So on one side of this wall, okay, this goes right through the middle of Berlin, by the way, the big city, the capital of modern-day Germany. One side is West Germany. The other side is East Germany. And after World War II, Germany was basically carved up between the Eastern and Western powers. The Western powers being Enlightenment, believing in democracy. Okay, so that's West Germany. East Germany, communist. Okay, because the Russians took that part of Berlin. So there's just a great struggle that's gone throughout history between the East and the West. democracy and freedom versus communism. Boom, butting heads. And like I said, we've gone to war. I mean, heck, even in our backyards, folks, Cuba had a communist revolution under a man named Fidel Castro. And during the 1960s, we had a missile crisis because since they're communists now in Cuba and they ally themselves with the Soviet Union, the Soviets came over and put a bunch of nuclear tipped warheads in Cuba and pointed them at America. And for a brief period of time, we were freaking out because we were afraid of a nuclear war in America. Very terrifying stuff. This is China. Okay, this is the Communist Party of China, and the Communist Party has absolute power in China. So if you just think about it this way, folks, if it wasn't for Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks and their belief in communism, communism never would have spread throughout the world like it did. It would have prevented a lot of wars, but it also would have created a completely different landscape politically and economically than what we have today. So our world was directly impacted by the Russian Revolution. All you have to do is just follow the trail, connect the dots. You can see how it all kind of connects together. So that is that, folks. That is all I have to say about the Russian Revolution. It was a big deal, and it all comes down to the fact that they were communism. And hey, kids, get outside. It's beautiful weather, and socially distanced, but you can still get fresh air and exercise and socially distanced. They're not like they don't cancel each other out. Okay, you can do both. And as far as your assignment for this, I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but I will be posting this video soon, and there's going to be an assignment to follow. Take care, kids.